Um, Jonathan Merritt. Um, wrote a hit piece last week, warned us it was coming, said, "Hey, this is going to be, pretty zesty type thing." Jonathan Merritt has a name amongst evangelicals because his father was president of the Southern Baptist Convention at one point. It's my understanding. Certainly well known in Southern Baptist circles. He has veered sharply to the left. There is much discussion concerning sexual orientation issues. And he has decided to utilize his platform, and recently, I think just over the past few weeks, to move toward the nuclear option, shall we say. He wrote a piece in response to Albert Mohler's answering of a question, as I recall. If you listen to Mohler on the briefing, then you know that he has been speaking much recently about what you can only identify as radicalization of the left in the Democratic Party. He has noted many times that, for example, Barack Obama would almost be a Republican today, back in 2008, as far as the platform upon which he ran. And that he then moved to the left in 2012, and now 8 years later, they're so far beyond where he was that he would not have a ghost of a chance if he ran on the platform that he had in 2012, and certainly not in 2008. So the radicals, the leftist radicals in the Democratic Party, which I really believe just need to start identifying it for what it really is, the Socialist Party, have pushed. Mohler spent a lot of time talking about how Bernie Sanders may not be the candidate, but he won because he pushed his ideas to where now the difference between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders is minimal, and where Joe Biden was 4 years ago and where he is now is primarily because of Bernie Sanders. So he's been talking about this, and he covers religious freedom issues. He was just talking about what we're going to talk about, and that is this Arizona Law Journal article that was quoted from heavily in a Harvard Journal article, warning about the dangers of homeschooling. And so he's been talking on the briefing and in other things that he does about this. This isn't just a leftward lurch. It is a dive to the left, which is taking most of the political structure right along with it. The widening divide, the fact there's no middle anymore. There used to be a middle that would provide a foundation for cooperation between the two sides. There is no middle anymore. The middle has been evacuated. You hear everybody talking about the polarization in the American political scene, and there is absolutely no question about that, and that is being seen right now in the response to COVID-19, and now in the pushback, where people are saying enough is enough. The numbers that you were using didn't work out, and we are doing a swan dive into a global depression that will result in far more deaths and far more misery than the worst COVID-19 outbreak you could ever have. Did y'all notice something today, by the way? Did you see the price of oil earlier today? It went negative. It went negative. That's a complete crash. Do you have any idea how destabilizing that will be in many nations. We are talking about a massive increase in the probability of warfare. People tend to die in war, just so that people remember. War is not a good thing. Starvation is not a good thing. And that then also generally leads to more disease. So people are saying, whoa, wait a minute. We went the wrong direction. Big time. Could we try to pull out of this tailspin before the entire plane just goes into the ground? We're getting pretty close here. And what's big tech doing? Censoring. Shutting people down. Shutting people down. This is what's coming. So the point is, I went off track a little bit there. Mohler's been talking about these things, and so he was asked a question about voting if there is an election in November of 2020. And he said that he did not vote for Trump in 2016, but he would vote Republican in 2020. Why? Because 2020 is not 2016. And if you can't see that in 4 years, there has been a massive change, massive shift, then you're just not watching. You're just not thinking, you're not listening, you're not seeing what's going on. And so this was taken as flip-flopping on his part. And there's a video, it's been on YouTube for years, that was put out basically by the people that got bounced out of Southern Seminary when Mohler took over. And it's one of the first times a theological seminary has gone from moving to the left to moving back to the right. But there's been a video out there for a long time. And basically all of its talking points were repeated in this article as if it was something new, which it wasn't. And so of course, I do respond to Jonathan Merritt. He doesn't respond to anything. He won't engage on anything. But I pointed out that somehow you wrote an entire article and didn't mention the reality of what's going on today, the reality of full-blown, communists on our own soil in positions of authority. They may still call themselves socialists or whatever else, but they're communists, and we all know exactly. They love the CCP. They love China. They want us to be China. That's what they want. And so what do when you have a entire spectrum of politics that wants to end the Constitution and our constitutional republic and our freedoms and liberties along with it, which God is in control of that. We don't deserve the blessings we've got. We forfeited them, and we've got blood all over our hands. So if God wants to do that, but I, as a Christian, am still called to speak the truth in that context, call for repentance, but also recognize that communism is just as satanic as Gnosticism. Xi Jinping is not God. He will never be God. He thinks he is, and he thinks the state can be God. The state is not God. And it's one thing to call the state to repentance under God for murdering children. It's another thing to have a state that thinks it is God and therefore murdering children is good. Different situation. And so it's fully understandable why Mohler has said what he said, but it wasn't mentioned even in passing by Jonathan Merritt. We don't need to worry about the real reasons. Let's just do a hit piece. And then the next day, hey, let's take out John Piper. Let's take out John Piper. And in a incredibly, not only dismissive, but disrespectful, nasty fashion. Because this man, Jonathan Merritt, clearly detests the sovereignty of God, detests the idea that God would ever bring judgment upon this earth. Oh my goodness, does he detest that? Now, have we not seen all sorts of apostates over the past couple of years? And after a while, you sort of stop hearing about them. The problem is Merritt still has connections with quote unquote, whatever you want to call it, Christian journalism. And so he gets to vent his spleen, shall we say, within those contexts. Will he eventually just be out there, jumped off the apostasy cliff, and you no longer hear about him? Well, I don't know. But the point is that here you've got someone, and you say, well, why do you even bother following him? I follow about 2 or 3 people on Twitter to help remind me of how people really think in the world today. The tendency for us is we live in our own echo chamber and we're around other believers. And so when we encounter someone who is just really sold out to a secular worldview, we're sort of taken aback for a second. We shouldn't be. This is where people are. And this was illustrated incredibly well. And it was on this morning's briefing, if you get a chance to listen to it. I started seeing references to this story over the weekend, I think, on Twitter, to a Harvard journal that was primarily quoting from an Arizona law journal. A woman professor who is warning about the dangers of homeschooling. Now, this probably was ready for publication before the COVID stuff hit. So it's sort of funny because I've been seeing a number of people on Twitter going, I cannot believe the difference in my children's behavior now that they haven't been to public school for a month. They are calmer. They are happier. Our family is doing better. Wow. Yeah. I think? I'm not the only person who's been hoping that there would be quite a bump to the number of people who, after this is over, go, you know what? That wasn't all that bad. We can do without a lot of stuff. And my kids are worth it. And so homeschooling might get a bump. Here's the problem. There are already many European nations where homeschooling is not allowed. You all heard the story about Germany. You cannot homeschool in Germany. You have to send your children to the state. They get your children for many hours a day. And that places a huge weight upon parents because just because the state does that doesn't mean that your responsibility ends. So now you have to spend your evenings counteracting positively through the inculcation of a Christian worldview, the inculcation of statist secularism in the state schools. I have scared a number of people half to death by making this assertion. Once the left wins both chambers of Congress, both houses, House and the Senate, and the presidency, one of the very first things that will be done will to be get rid of homeschooling. You say, that can't be done. Yoder. If you don't know what Yoder is a Supreme Court decision that allowed the Amish to withdraw their children after 8th grade and not, it gave some defense to parents. But see, the problem is any Supreme Court decision is liable to be overturned or modified. And the reality is that the left knows that key to the creation of the fantasy worldview of secularism, because that's what it is. If we are made in the image of God, then the secular worldview is a fantasy. And to maintain a fantasy, you have to be constantly pouring effort into the creation of that fantasy. Use a Star Trek illustration. Remember, they didn't do this in original Star Trek because they didn't have but the holodeck, the holodeck, where the computer creates a different context, holograms for you to interact in, so you can play fantasy games and so on and so forth. Well, if something goes wrong with the ship and the power goes out, what happens to the holodeck? Goes away. You got to be pouring energy into it to create that fantasy world. Well, we live in God's world. And secularism, humanism, the Darwinian worldview is a fantasy. It requires the constant suppression of God's truth. And the main mechanism for suppressing that truth is what? Is the positive, repetitive affirmation of a secular worldview. You have to have that to control the populace, to create your socialist paradise. And once socialism has power, it always becomes communism. So to create that paradise, you have to own those people during the formative periods of their thinking. That's how you do it. So I have said, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. Just listen to how these people speak. You get a next generation, put any one of how many were in the back last July, how many were running? 18, 20, 21 people running on the Democratic side. You take any one of those candidates, make them president, give them the Senate and the House, and then look me in the eye and say, oh, they'll protect our rights. They'll protect homeschooling. Naive a lot? Yeah, that's naivete on a pretty stunning level. And so, how do we respond to something like this? I mean, I'm looking at these people on Twitter who are ignoring the rise of socialism, statism, techno-totalitarianism, where everything you do is monitored by Big Brother and controlled by Big Brother, and all of your speech must be run through the filter of Big Brother. Promoting homosexuality, promoting transgenderism, promoting bisexuality, promoting the profanation of marriage, promoting euthanasia, promoting abortion and infanticide, and yet going, yeah, well, I don't want to be a single issue voter, so all that's okay. And you're a Christian, right? Yeah, but the other side is just as bad. The other side is not just as bad. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. Who is going most likely to force your children to a state school? Well, most of you are already doing that anyways, but who's going to force you to do that? Take away your right. One of the frightening things, by the way, read that article. Mohler read it this parts this morning. One of the most frightening aspects of it was this professor is saying children need to be acclimated to society. So in other words, be exposed to all the drugs and the sex and all the differing methods of morality at a young age. And they need to be around reporters. People who can report child abuse. Because, of course, child abuse never takes place in public schools. There's no drug use in public schools. There are no shootings in public schools. There is no sexuality going in public schools. There's no pregnancy in public schools. Public schools are wonderful. Really? Now, don't get me wrong. I can fully see how a crazed, wacko person could abuse their children in the mountains someplace. Yeah, we've heard stories. But what percentage is that? What percentage of people who are homeschooling does that represent? And what percentage of students going to a public school are exposed to sexuality, drugs, violence, and the like? Compare the two. There is no comparison. There is no comparison. None. So, to listen to this elite academic not even try to veil her detestation of the Christian worldview, her detestation of God's law, her loathing of anyone who would dare to teach a worldview that says God created male and female and it was good. They loathe that. They honestly function upon the idea that their IQ is so far above ours that, we talk about 1984 all the time because we're seeing it being fulfilled. Newspeak and rewriting history and Big Brother and the whole it's happening before our eyes. But that's not the only dystopian novel out there that's relevant. There's another one that's being fulfilled too. It's called Brave New World. Aldous Huxley's work. And what you're seeing here is the disdain that the alphas have for the deltas and the epsilons. They think they're the alphas. And Christians are the deltas and the epsilons. And you know what? Outside of God's sight, they're right. What does 1 Corinthians chapter 1 say? Not many wise, not many eugenes, well-born, eugenic. That's a very word, transliterated into English, eugenic. Not many well-born. Because why? Because God doesn't choose to reveal himself through the wisdom of the world, but through the foolishness of the message preached. And so there's a sense, really, to be honest with you, where the elites are right. But if they just knew what the final state of everything was going to be, then they would see their grave error. So that article, we need to understand that the people, think about Harvard and Yale. What are the two schools that produce the majority of our highest level judges in the United States? Harvard and Yale. Well, Supreme Court, yeah. But I mean, talking about federal and other positions. Harvard and Yale. This is the worldview that is placed into the most conservative graduate of Harvard and Yale. You want to talk to me about how we are protected by the Constitution? I'm sorry, that's just so naive. History tells us there have been constitutions before. And when it came time within that society that the worldview of the founders had been rejected, those little pieces of paper cannot protect anyone. Ours had a great run. There was much wisdom. It wasn't perfect. But man, one of its most brilliant insights was distribute power widely because mankind is evil. Yep, that's Christian worldview. That's gone. That doesn't exist anymore. And so, parents, you're homeschooling right now? Do it as long as you can. Lay the firmest foundation you possibly can and then make the commitment. Look, what are you going to do? I mean, it's real easy to say, I'll stand at my door with my AK-47. Well, you're going to die. Okay? You may have your AK-47, but they've got 27 AK-47s out there. Actually, they've got AR-15s. But anyway, and you're going to get gunned down. And you're just going to be portrayed as a nutcase. And they're going to take your kids away anyways. So what are you going to do? Well, what are Christian parents in Germany doing right now? Yeah, their kids go to school. And then they have to meet with them and counteract. And that means a lot of extra time and a lot less opportunities for fulfilling your fundsville and all the rest of that stuff. That's what you got to do. That's what you got to do. I mean, you can run and flee. You can try to find someplace else, but this seems to be happening every place. I'll go to Canada. It's worse. I'll go to Australia. New Zealand. Where are you going to go? I mean, I suppose there are maybe a few third world countries you might be able to run off to that are still so poorly governed that you could hide out in the mountains someplace, but most of us do not have that option. So you better be thinking about it now. You, your wife, together with your church family, how are you going to handle it? What are you going to do? What happens when it, because it's coming a lot faster than we thought, and the accelerator was pressed through the floorboard starting at the end of February 2020. Because now it is interesting to compare the United Kingdom with the United States. There have been no situations where capitals or major cities in the UK have been flooded by armed people in pickup trucks. Okay? That ain't going to happen. They don't have pickup trucks and they ain't armed. So they're all just sitting in their houses. There are a few that are really not happy about all this, but the majority of the world's population said, yeah, okay, whatever. Just keep us safe. We're not concerned about the rest of the stuff. We're not concerned about what you're going to do with this down the road and what you're going to use as the next big thing. Will it be technological? Will it be a crash of the internet? Will it be infrastructure, electricity, distribution of food? Lots of ways to do it. And we all just go, okay, whatever, just please take care of us. We look to you, oh, great and powerful Oz, upstate government, whatever. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Stuff to think about. And from a Christian worldview, if you have children, God's given you a responsibility for those children. So, Voddie Baucham used to say, don't be shocked when you send your children off to spend the day constantly with Caesar if they come back as Romans. All right, well, now Caesar is marching his legions into your front room. What are you going to do then?